Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. We'd like to welcome you to AMA's first Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion event, The Pandemic, Protest, and the Politics, Shape 2020. Where do we go from here? My name is Roy Broderick, and I have the pleasure of sharing a leadership role here at the AMA. I'm really excited about today's panel. Would like to welcome everyone for being here. So let's jump into it. Of course, we would like to thank our sponsors. We appreciate all of your support in the event that we have anyone on the line that is interested in becoming a sponsor for us. Please feel free to reach out to Guy Powell at sponsorships@amaatlanta.com. I also would like to introduce our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, Mr. Russell Clark, Ms. Jess Dupuy, Ms. Twana Harris, Ms. Michelle Howard, Ms. Keonda Noel, Ms. Kimberly Strong, Mr. Michael Stanley, and Ms. Nina Hines. I appreciate all of you for joining in the movement. If you are interested in volunteering or finding out more about our committee, I will put in my email address for you to reach out to me directly. Thank you again for joining us today. And I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Ms. Twana Harris.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to one of our first meetings here as a part of the DEI Council with American Marketing Association here in the Atlanta chapter. Before I jump right into introductions, I want to kind of set the frame for the conversation and why you're talking to the panel that you're going to be talking with today. 2020, I think we all realized, was a very difficult time for most of us. And coming into 2021, we're realizing that we all, as marketers, have to step to the front lines of really defining our new normal. But as it pertains specifically to the disparities and the inequities that are plaguing people of color in this country, we wanted to bring together a diverse group of panels, professionals with strong backgrounds on how these experiences have not only impacted the Black community and what our role is in leading efforts that are really going to do a better job during, driving real change, impact, and goodwill for our companies, our communities, and our culture. So I'd like to introduce Amani Miles, who is the founder and CEO of the CultureCon and the Creative Collective. Also, Willie Henry, who is the manager of inclusion recruiting for Netflix. And last but not least is Keenan Harris, who's the senior multicultural manager for Jack Daniels. And let me just say that today, we're not only bringing to you our expertise from our professional experiences, but more so even our experiences and our perspectives from our lived experiences. So let's just go ahead and jump in. Good afternoon, panel. How's everybody doing? I know it's a little nasty here in Atlanta, but you guys holding on?
Doing well. Happy to be here.
Okay, good.
Likewise.
Yeah, doing well. Thank you for having me. Calling in from Chicago, so I'll be a transplant today, but thank you guys for having me in Atlanta for sure.
Okay. I love it. And please, audience, please chime in. We want this to be a very interactive conversation, and we'll be addressing some of your questions and comments along the way. But I'd like to just kind of start off. I know we talked about, how do we set the frame? And let's just not act as if 2020 just went away. It's still very present for most of us. And so what I wanted to just kind of start is with a little bit of a round of conversation or response around what was that moment of pause, like real pause, inflection, and reaction to say, something's really wrong. We've got to do a better job. And quite frankly, what's my role in this process? And I'll just let either one of you just jump right on in.
I can jump in and kick us off. So good afternoon, everyone. I would say for me, the Ahmaud Arbery murder was a big moment in regards to, I think, sort of sort of moving people, if you will, in a direction of like sort of shock in regards to like, whoa, this is something that's happening within America in 2020. And then of course, sadly, a while later, of course, we had George Floyd's, of course, murder on screen, right? And it was so graphic, it was so horrible that I think it was the defining moment clearly for the movement in many ways. Although, of course, as we know, as Black people, we've had moments and movements before, way before George Floyd, with other brothers and sisters who unfortunately were victims to hate crimes and violence and things of that nature. But I think that was the moment where it just really sort of woke everybody up, because it wasn't necessarily just sort of like your lived experience, or even if it wasn't your lived experience, but it was also thinking about your work experience, and also just sort of like how you moved within your neighborhoods, things of that nature. It sort of just shocked your conscience and like, wow, this is real life. This isn't on the movie screens, right? This is real life that's happening in 2020. So I think that was the moment. And then obviously you started seeing a lot of the movement right here in the US, but also globally.
Thank you so much.
I'll second that. I think there were so many things compacted, right? A pandemic inside a pandemic. And I think what I realized is how long I'd been holding my breath, how long I'd been coming to work, seeing a murder over the weekend, and coming to work and putting that in such a different room than the rest of my life. And having colleagues that are like, oh my gosh, did you see The Bachelor? And it's like, wait, there's been, and just understanding that there were such different worlds and perspectives. And I remember a lot of folks over the summer saying, wait, this isn't America. And a lot of Black people being like, no, yes, it is. And I think what really made it feel, like you just said, that shock to the conscience, was that it was a collective conversation. Because of the pandemic, the world really stopped. There wasn't sports, the Olympics had been canceled, and everyone had to have this conversation. And so in a way, I'm thankful that it was all compacted, because to your point, this wasn't the first time that we had experienced something like this, but finally people were talking about it, not just within our community, but then within the global community. So I was really thankful about that.
Yeah, I would say the same. Truly, I mean, George Floyd was truly the crux in regards to, just the focus. And I think a lot of times we're told to bring our authentic selves to work, right? And yet and still, I'm seeing myself being murdered on the screen, right? So in essence, how do you do that? So I mean, I think when you see that in some of the conversation that was had, and then also some of the reactions from colleagues where we were truly affected, but they were also probably confused on how we weren't even more deeply affected in certain instances, because we were used to seeing certain things, right? And their mind was just blown to not understand how we, again, clearly we were outraged. Clearly it's terrible, and all the things that we've seen over the years, but just the way that it was taken from myself and certain colleagues was just very interesting for them to comprehend how we looked at that and how we become somewhat immune to some of the injustices that happened to us. So, so moving forward there, and I think, again, another one was Blackout Tuesday, right? I think anybody that was within the corporate structure at that point in time and deals with any of the communication and all of that comes out from companies. I mean, the inner workings of the debates from companies as a whole of, do you post, do you not post, what's your structure? I mean, that was something that I probably never seen before in my years in corporate America. So those are two things I would definitely call out.
It's really interesting because I think we think about these moments as a moment in time, sometimes even ourselves, those of us that are experiencing these, but it wasn't until we started to talk about it that I felt the physiological impact of reliving that situation all over again. And, I would say I make my opinions very, very, very public, even within my workplace. I have 2 African-American sons. And so that moment was something that I had to internalize and really reflect. But again, sometimes within these environments, we just don't have that moment to just kind of step away from the grind, the water cooler conversations about The Bachelor. We don't get that privilege to step away and really deal with and really understand our feelings. So thank you all for that. You know, one of the things that Keena, you just kind of touched on was like, there's these moments and we are all responsible for, particularly in our roles, right? We're responsible for how do we deal with this from a corporate perspective? Do we jump on board and also to make some sort of statement? Do we also sit around a boardroom and talk about like, what are the next moves? What do we need to do to happen? And so there's been this whole entire conversation around whether this is just a momentary response or if this is actually the start of a true movement for change. I'd love to just get your perspectives around what have you seen? What have you heard? What do you think about that place that we're at right now? I'm gonna throw it to you, Keenan, since I started with you.
Yeah. No problem. I think it all just depends, right? I mean, I think we have we've witnessed a new C-suite offering, right, for most companies across the board with that chief diversity inclusion officer, and I think that's a great first step. I think it's I think the question is how is that role funded? How is that role empowered? I think that's all the next steps of it. Is make sure it's not performative per se. So but I think that's clearly something probably would not have happened without some of the instances that have occurred. But I think it's truly just got to be rooted in strategy. I mean, I can relate this to my experience a little bit in my company. I mean, we actually published a 2030 D&I strategy 2 years ago. So that D&I strategy has 2030 goals in regards to representation, in regards to hiring, in regards to leadership, and it really drills down on gender and race. What I will say is that it was published 2 years ago. The directive was for everybody to read that. But it truly became an asset, I would say, this year, right? At that point, because you already had it. So at this point, now the reference back to it and to dig into it. Whereas before, it could have been more of a book on the shelf for folks in regards to that strategy. So I think, to be able to do the work in that instance and to have to have that asset and that resources is what's going to be key. You got to have the people, you got to have the the resources, the assets, all that's got to align for it to be a movement.
And I just want to piggyback on this. I'm going to throw this directly to Willie because Willie's been in a D&I capacity for years. And so I think there's a certain amount of weight that comes along with these moments that, our D&I counterparts are just like, wait a minute, this has got to be bigger than us. Willie, what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I 100% agree. Hiring diversity practitioners, that's a great step, but it's way bigger than just hiring a diversity team or a civil rights leader, whatever the case may be. It takes all of us in regards to really having more skin in the game, right? You can't just talk the talk and not walk the walk. And I think in many ways, companies before we got to 2020 were already sort of on their diversity journey, right? Their inclusion journey. So they were already doing work around sort of increasing representation and improving their employee experience and building equity into their processes so you could recognize the impact and the performance of people of color across the board. But I think 2020 sort of accelerated that, right? Because it was so, again, like I said earlier, like these moments that took place in 2020 were just so significant that it shocked the conscious, but it also woke up individuals within our community to say, well, these things that are happening to me in a very different way, right? When it comes to recognizing my impact, my performance, allowing me to elevate myself and move into higher roles and positions and opportunities. And I think you had sort of a rising up of employees who in many ways are the minorities in their companies saying, okay, hey, we are part of these companies and we have a voice and we need to step up to say something about this, but also hold our leaders accountable. So the leadership accountability is critical in regards to what we have seen thus far with what happened last year. So companies making statements around standing up and supporting the Black community. We stand against, racism, talking about these various goals, as Keenan mentioned, for example, and other things that they're doing to ensure that they're showing up and really adding, really hold themselves accountable, but putting that skin in the game. And so as a D&I professional, I play my role in regards to doing my part with focusing on increasing representation and pushing on that accountability to ensure that we reach those goals over a period of time. But ultimately, it's about your leadership and also your managers and also your partners to make sure that we're keeping each other accountable and we're doing to work to move forward and make sure that we're providing that equity, that fairness for not only Black employees, but other underrepresented employees within your organizations.
And I want to chime in real quick and just kind of throw this one to Amani, because I think Amani has a really special role, as the face and the person who's in the leadership capacity for both CultureCon as well as the Creative Collective. You have an immense amount of power when it comes to helping corporations and brands really understand how can they be a part of some of your activations in a way that is going to invest in Black culture as opposed to extracting from Black culture. Can you kind of give me a little bit of perspective around that?
For sure. I think for us, it really starts with partnership and the true definition. So you can't, I always do the collaboration of a chef, right? You have to, when you're throwing a dinner party, when you're there from the beginning, you've got the ingredients together, you let the chef cook, right? You wouldn't show up the night of the dinner party and just have a seat at the table if you're co-hosting the dinner party. And it's the same thing with the culture. We can smell when something's not authentic and it's not going to ever land. And so there's so many examples, right, where brands or partners don't get the buy-in from the culture, try to do it on their own, and it falls flat. But there's so many successful examples of where you go to where the people are, you go to the experts in the field, and you don't try to be something that you're not. And so with us, we work with our partners from day one in terms of what is the end goal? What are we trying to do? How can we really approach this in an authentic way? Because authenticity, I know we say this all the time, but it really is key and it makes a difference. And at this point in time, like there's so many resources in our community, it just doesn't make sense to do it on your own. It's bad business to do it on your own. You need the buy-in. And so for us, I think it's like starting together and, admitting, hey, we haven't shown up in this place before. We're a little late, we'll admit it, but we're here now. We've got resources, we've got a budget. We're not just going to get you exposure. We've got a budget and we're really trying to reach this community.
No, I love that. I love that. And from the perspective of someone who's been in multicultural marketing, from the agency side, from the client side, from the nonprofit side, like I've seen it, I've heard it all, right? And the one thing that I've noticed is that we tend to see more authenticity, not 100% all the time, but we tend to see more authenticity when it's a group of people who may speak a different language, right? Just because they have to, someone's got to translate the language. I think one of the bigger challenges that comes specifically from Black culture is that we all speak English. And so one of the phrases that I always say is just because we all speak English doesn't mean that everybody knows how to interpret Black. And that's one of the reasons why the lived experience has got to carry more weight. And one of the tangible responses that I want everyone to take away from today's conversation is that we have to be at the table. There's a lived experience. There are certain nuances culturally that other people just don't understand. And it's contextual and it's because of our history and our culture in this country. And so with that said, as we think about like, what is 2020 all about? What are our roles specifically? Let's help everybody kind of define what does meaningful, sustainable, systemic change really look like in our industry? Is that just hiring more Black and brown people? Is that just filling the pipeline of interns? I think Tiffany Warren of AdColor wrote an amazing article, and anybody you just kind of Google her. Her name is Tiffany Warren. She was going to do a huge AdColor diversity conference in Atlanta, and unfortunately, due to COVID, it just didn't happen. But I think a year or two ago, she penned a really amazing article about how feeding the pipeline was essentially feeding a set of sheep into the wolves, right? Because there's no one inside of that organization to really protect them and say, you know what, she's got a point, right? And this is why, right? And so a lot of times when there's a diverse perspective, there's no one in there to really, champion that perspective, right? And so there's not only a need for us filling the pipeline, but like, where is that representation from a mentorship, from a championship standpoint? And for me, that's one of the biggest opportunities that I think we have for long-term sustainable change. But I'd love to hear from everybody else. And please, everyone in the audience, please chime into the chat because we'd love to hear your perspectives as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. I feel like you should always start where you are. So before you're trying to hire new talent, there is existing talent within, hopefully, existing talent, within your infrastructure who probably has some really great ideas. What is their experience like? I think that you should always start where you are with that foundation. And I also agree with you that it has to be not an either or, it's a both and. So grow your talent within and create a pipeline. But you're exactly right. You can't just hire a bunch of people of color if there's no infrastructure. If I come in as a coordinator and I'm looking up and there's no one of color at a senior level, you've already told me the trajectory of diversity at a senior level. And I'm not very inspired to work for a company where I don't see any kind of growth opportunity. And so I think it's, nurturing the talent that you have, growing the talent that you have, and also creating those pipelines, and then also partnering with those pipeline organizations who are growing the talent where they are so that it's a full 360 moment.
Yeah, Amani summarized it really well, sort of stole my thunder a little bit, because I've been on both sides of the house. I'm currently at Netflix now as a manager leading inclusive recruiting, hiring practices and programs. So Amani, I'll be talking to you and your organization soon about our CultureCon partnership, more to come on that. And also just like thinking about the employee experience. Again, I always talk to my recruiting partners about thinking about it holistically, like a cycle. Like you can do all this amazing work, partner with amazing organizations like AdColor, CultureCon, et cetera, so forth, and hire people. But to your point, Amani, if you're not giving them the best internal experience, they're going to have a horrible experience. They're going to leave the company and go somewhere else. You just invested this person to go to another company, and they're going to talk probably crap about you because you gave them a crappy experience. I was going to say another word, but I'm not sure if I should cuss or not, so I'll leave that alone. And ultimately it impacts your brand, right? You're going to become an employer that's less desirable and lose out on potential top talent. And so you have to not only invest in the recruiting experience, you have to invest in the employee experience. You have to make sure, again, you're holding your leaders accountable. And I've been fortunate to be on both sides because prior to joining Netflix, I was at Facebook and I was on the diversity team. And I was supporting our Black and Latinx employee experience, supporting the ERGs at Facebook as well, too, and really helping to ensure they had that strong sense of belonging and community. And also uplifting their needs to our leadership to ensure we had systemic change. And so I recommend to all of you who are listening, think about your current role and identify the right partners to uplift whatever concerns you have and ensure that it's getting to your leaders and that, they again are being held accountable for change, because ultimately it's up to you. You just can't let them talk the talk and not walk the walk. You can definitely keep your leaders accountable. So use your voice as a collective. I know sometimes it's scary to do that on your own. So use your community and make sure that you're voicing those concerns to lead to real change over time for your company.
Yeah, I was just going to add on. I mean, 100% agree. I mean, it's the reason why we're calling it recruitment and retention, right? So if you're not digging into the retention part, in essence, you're going to be running in place, right? So you're going to hire two, you're going to lose two, you're going to hire two, you're going to lose two. And one thing that I think we've really have tried to dig into is, as much as we can talk about diversifying the slate, right? So when we're talking about an interview slate, let's diversify the slate. If you're not able to diversify the panel, the interview panel that is interviewing that particular slate, you have some additional challenges there also, right? Because end of the day, as diverse as that slate needs to be, that panel needs to be the same. Because as you said, there's so many intricacies, different archetypes, all the things that we're talking about when we are hiring diversity in people. Somebody has to also speak that language when we're in essence trying to hire the folks. So I mean, you have to look at it dual fold in both of those.
Let me just also, those are great responses. I really appreciate you guys for that. I'm gonna dig a little bit into social media a little bit, right? Because social media has really, given people a voice that they traditionally did not have. And so a couple of things. So I don't have the exact stats because the newest numbers are not available, but what we've seen since last summer is that there's been a drastic drop in the support behind the Black Lives Matter movement, right? So let's take that one data point. And then there's also been this really incredible meme that's been floating around, and it says, I know I'm on your mood board, but when do I get into your boardroom? Right. And so there are people saying, I understand the value behind my culture, and I understand that you want to reflect that for your brand, and it drives revenue and it drives profits. But why am I not worthy of being in a strategic decision-making level? Love to just kind of sort of hear, what is our role as we continue as marketers, as D&I folk, as people who are leading the voice for our brand? How do we help to kind of sort of uplift that mentality around, yes, Black Lives Matter still matter. Like, in order for us to still matter, this movement's got to continue to carry weight, and it can't be dumbed down. It can't be super subtle and quiet, because when that happens, people lose support for the actual movement. And then we see that continue to proliferate in our media when we see, a Rihanna on the front of somebody's marketing campaign, but then when you actually kind of pan over to the corporate team that's managing that, they don't share many of the lived experiences that are required to bring through the authenticity of that particular campaign. So how do we start to champion for those types of change? I'm going to start with Amani, if I could.
I think, I'm optimistic. I am, because last year was the first year I saw a lot of brands even acknowledge Black lives. I never thought I was even to see a lot of these corporations have to put their flag in the ground. And again, I know we could go down the rabbit hole of, well, what did they do after that? But I think that I think social media is a good thing for that very reason, that there is a pressure being put on brands that did not exist in the past. There are values that are now being assigned to brands that if your values don't align with my values, I don't really want to buy your product. Like, if you're not kind of showing up for us, and then we have Gen Z who's coming up, who is the most value centered generation ever. Like, they are like 13 saving the world from deforestation. And so I will say that it doesn't surprise me that the momentum isn't as quick as it was, when George Floyd first was murdered, unfortunately. But I do believe that that door was cracked open, and that's all we needed for it to never be shut again. So I do think that progress is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And I do think that we all have to sometimes take a step back, because it's a lot of work and pressure. And sometimes you just have to protect your peace. But I also do feel that, like, even in the partners that are showing up with the Creative Collective, the partners that are ready to show up at CultureCon, I do think, and I'm not sure who made that point, but about the employees, but there's a different kind of pressure that's happening internally and externally. You have people of color and people not of color internally being like, wait, what are we going to do about this? And then you have external consumers and influencers, saying, wait, what are you going to do about this? So something is going to shift. And I really, truly do believe that.
Yeah, I would agree. You're seeing the change, and to Amani's point again, it's a marathon. It's going to take some time, and I think I know I've said accountability probably at least 10 times at this point. I'm going to keep saying it, because that's the reality of this. That you're going to have these swings. You're going to have, like, we're in Black History Month, right? So I would guess that most companies have sort of invested in activities and events and so forth, and sort of reaffirmed their support and solidarity for supporting the Black community, because it's Black History Month. What happens in March? What happens in April, May, June, July, et cetera, so forth? That's where you got to see more of the accountability, the pressure in regards to sort of keeping, again, your leadership, your company accountable. Like, are you still showing up? When it's not obvious that it's a month that we're celebrating for the Black community. And so I think you'll definitely see it over time. It's there, it's happening. You heard from, like, Keenan, for example, talking about diversity goals and commitments. Like, these things have been established already, and they're being worked on, right? And then you have people like myself and others who are in these roles who are definitely pushing for more inclusion, more representation, and then also trying to, solve for these challenging problems when it comes to the overall employee experience. You may not necessarily hear about it as much because it's not as loud right now, right? It's sort of a quiet sort of time frame, if you will, in a sense, because there's also of course, let's acknowledge the fact that our Asian brothers and sisters have been definitely been getting impacted as well too, along with hate crimes and things of that nature. So rightfully so, there's been a lot of visibility there. So I think, you know, the key thing is just to keep the momentum, keep talking about it, keep raising it in your opportunities when you're showing up. You know, whether it's in the board meetings, or if it's in your team meetings, or if it's within your ERGs. You know, we just got to continue to make sure we're bringing this up to make sure that it's still fresh and top of mind.
Just what I would add to that is that you know, there's just truly a new type of strategy which has emerged, I would say, and that's a social responsibility strategy. You know, whereas companies will have D&I strategies, brands have multicultural marketing strategies, but then there is a social responsibility strategy which is now on the rise for multiple brands, right? So this is less about we have a platform and we make a donation to this because of this particular platform. It's truly how do we align? What is our pyramid, our brand pyramid in regards to social responsibility, right? So that is being worked on by multiple brands that I touch per se, and it's something completely new and different from our perspective. So to say, how do we, you know, if we say our goals are to enhance lives or whatever that might be, in essence, how do we do that? You know, what is our strategy in essence to do that, and what strategy or what responsibility do we have to our consumers, right? So again, if our consumers are this particular consumer, how are we giving back? In essence, how are we putting them in place to win? How are we doing all the above? So it's just been very interesting. And again, we have drilled that down to from a brand standpoint more than a corporate responsibility strategy, because I think, again, consumers want to hear from brands, right? As much as we talk about, hey, what is this particular brand doing versus we understand parent companies and whatnot, but again, the brand that I buy off of the shelf, for instance, how do they support what I believe in? So.
You know, this is a great conversation. I just really appreciate you guys for being so candid. One of the things that I did not anticipate putting into this conversation, but I think it's really necessary. I think that there has been a tremendous focus on Atlanta, right, in a multitude of different ways just recently, right? And so I think that from, you know, going back to our title of this day, like from the impact of the Black community voting for the most recent elections to this whole new narrative around, you know, Black excellence living here in Atlanta, Black culture, and then Black tech. You know, where is there a tremendous opportunity for us to take the lead and to really kind of move this traction on in a quicker, faster, more meaningful way to show the rest of the nation what a model for equity really looks like in all ways, shapes, and forms. And you can feel free to kind of touch on any of those, but I'd love to just, I know that wasn't one of the questions that I sent you guys to like really prep for, so I'm catching you guys a little bit off guard. So I'm just gonna let whoever is ready to go kind of just jump in on that one.
I mean, it's already the wave. You know, I am coming back to Atlanta. I was in New York for 10 years. Everyone in New York is, let me not say everyone, but Atlanta's already on the map. It's been on the map for music. It's been on the map for culture. It's been on the map for TV. And I think, you know, to your point, now it's on the map for the politics and movements and Stacey Abrams and how we can really galvanize our community and just really create these ecosystems in Atlanta so that we're building from the ground up. And so I don't want, I mean, selfishly, I needed to get off the map because I'm trying to get a house here and now everyone's trying to come to Atlanta. But I think we really just have such a beautiful convergence of culture, that Southern hospitality. And now you've got all this entertainment. I think I saw the stat that was like Atlanta has surpassed was it California in terms of all the TV shows that are here? And so I'm so proud to be from here. And I think that Tawana, it really is, you know, you kind of took me under your wing and was like, Amani, here's all the things that's going on in Atlanta. And I think that's what we need more of is if we're looking to build something, looking to the right and looking to the left in terms of how we can build it together. You know, maybe I've got the community, but someone else has the building and I can inject that community in the building. And I think that's how we can continue to build up Atlanta.
Yeah, I was just going to add on that, You know, as we talked about, Twan, I mean, our longest standing multicultural program is based out of Atlanta. You know, it was created in Atlanta, Art Beats and Lyrics. We celebrated, you know, we just are celebrating 15 years, 15 years of a brand program, which is unheard of, right? I mean, it seems like lifespan is only about 3 years, maybe for programs, so you go into something else. So truly 15 years, and we're still evolving and elevating. So I think the ideation and the innovation is truly there. And I think even along that particular program, it's like it's across the country. It's everybody's favorite event. Everybody loves it. It is, you know, but it was still kind of like our little secret, right? You know, as far as our folks. So one thing that I looked to do was to put media resources behind that, right? So last year was the very first year that we told the ABNL story to the country with the national media partner, and in doing so, it was also my goal to not tell a Black story just to a Black audience, but tell a Black story to a total market audience, right? Because they're going to truly resonate to what it is in total. It doesn't just have to be that way. So, and then end of the day, I think the results from that campaign were through the roof. Like #1 engaged social and digital program that we've had, period, across non-multicultural, across everything. So that starts to open up eyes, right? So at that point, it's like, interesting. So the cultural connection and the cultural fluency and contextual relevance and any other buzzword we want to use, right, really works for Black and brown people. So let's continue to tell those stories, right, and not necessarily have to paint the world as a Benetton picture of what it looks like. No, this is truly it, right? You know, this is what you look like. This is what most of your friends look like. And this is what you do in your free time. And let's promote that to the world because people are going to resonate accordingly. So I think that, again, you know, Atlanta allowed us that creative freedom to build a program like that, and you know, honestly gave us the success to be able to take it national.
I'm just sitting here just in awe, right? Like, I'm like, okay, I got CultureCon tickets. I got Arts Beats Lyrics tickets. You know, I'm hoping Basil comes back because that's my birthday weekend. Yeah, so I'm so sorry. Go ahead, Willie.
Yeah, I don't have much more to add on. I think, you know, Monty and Keenan summarized it really well. There's a lot of investment in general happening within the A. I mean, there's so much happening, right? Companies coming here. We're definitely hiring more talent remotely here in Atlanta as well. Continuing to invest with our $100 million investment, you know, into the Black banks, you know, which some are here, of course, and giving back to the community that way. So there's this amazing diverse ecosystem that exists here, that we're all a part of, which is really big. I mean, I don't know if you could find that anywhere else in the United States. And so I think this is just a really great time to be here. Sorry, Money, you're probably going to see a whole lot more people coming. So you want to buy that house, get in fast, because look, people coming, you know, because the opportunities are here. And again, it's about the accountability. You're seeing the action happen, right? The behavior, the changes, they're happening within the investment within the Black community. So that's a good thing for us.
And I got to put in a plug, you know, if y'all going to buy, some of the best places in the city are along the Beltline. So with that said, I want to give everybody, I want to go to Q&A shortly, but I just want to give everybody, like, if there was one closing statement that you would make around where we are, where's the opportunity, what do we want to see? Ultimately, what do we want to see? Would just love to hear whatever your closing remarks might be.
I'll jump in. I would say on my end, and just from a multicultural marketing standpoint, just one of my theories is to start with a purpose. You know, in everything that I build, I in essence start with a purpose, and then I think as long as you're always aligned to what that purpose is, whether that's elevating Black art, right, or elevating Black filmmakers or Black and brown bartenders, whatever these programs are, I in essence always start with a purpose. So then when I start with that purpose, then I'll go to the big idea from that particular purpose, right? So start with the purpose, be rooted in that, go to the big idea, and then it's all going to fall in place from there, right? Because everything is going to circle back to that purpose, and then you're able to add more layers into the story, into the program and whatnot. But at the end of the day, you always know where you're going, right? Because where you're going is back to that original purpose. I think you can get off track sometimes where the idea comes up, but it's not necessarily rooted in anything. So, you know, when I'm just looking at the purpose, I think that's how it becomes more authentic. And I figure out how do we, in essence, really help to amplify, how do we elevate, how do we, again, looking at Black and brown folks, and how do we, you know, just give back and put them in place to win. So just kind of what the lens that I look at multicultural marketing from.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, a lot of it is storytelling and making sure that we're amplifying a lot of different stories. We're not a monolith, so it's not enough that there's, one Black television show. We need a ton of Black television shows telling a ton of different stories. And then I also think resources. There's so much talent and creativity that's untapped because they don't have access or resources. I just got I had a conversation with an entire beautiful creative agency, and I was like, I would bet my last dollar that so many people don't even know that these jobs exist, that you could grow up to create ideas for campaigns. And so I really just want to continue to be the bridge of access in terms of connecting all of these opportunities to all this untapped talent so that we can continue just to see people grow and thrive.
Yeah, plus one to all of that. I do want to go back to sort of the monolith comment, because that is something that I want to see brands do more of, which is sort of diversifying within the stories that they're telling. I think one of the things we, again, going back to 2020, we sort of got layered, if you will, was that there was impact to other parts of our Black community, particularly our Black trans community, for example. A lot of things happening there. And so how do we sort of ensure that we are not being monolithic in regards to how we're telling stories, and also thinking about intersectionality in regards to how we show up with the storytelling with our brands, and ensuring that, again, we are providing sort of this wide viewpoint, because it's not just here in the US, by the way, it's the global viewpoint as well too. And one of the things I love about, sorry to plug the company real quick, but Strong Black Lead, like, they just do a fantastic job of sort of amplifying the voices of Black people around the world, and not just focusing on just one sort of Black person, if you will, in a sense. And I think brands need to continue to make sure, again, they are diversifying their lens in regards to how they really tell the story of our community, while also, of course, making sure we're also part of that, right? We are directing and telling those stories. We're telling our own stories. So that's what I would just, hope to see as we go forward as well.
And I'll just say that, I'm really inspired. This kind of goes back to not only like the Atlanta thing, but I'm just really inspired by what happened in 2020 and what pressures it put on systems that needed to change. It goes back to when people say, hey, when are we going to go back to normal? And we don't want to go back to normal, because normal was not what it needed to be for us, and I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunities. And so when we look nationwide and we look at the examples that are working, I get this, I was just a part of a conversation to where someone kind of brought up the notion around best practices. And best practices is a term that we always use, but best practices got us here. So maybe we need to look at new practices. Like, how do we create new systems, new ways of really approaching some of these challenges? And I love the work that you see with, Michael B. Jordan, and how he's leading these new inclusion writers, right? That are driving, like, I'm not going to be a feature artist in this production if there's not this composition behind the scenes, right? To ensure that that authenticity is brought to the table. And so I see that there's a tremendous amount, but I love the analogy that Amani mentioned earlier, is that push pull from the inside and from the outside. It's got to be present. And so I think there's just nothing but tremendous opportunity for us moving forward. So I just want to thank each one of you. And I'm just going to go ahead and just ask a couple of quick questions. I know we are going to be wrapping up at 1 o'clock, but I wanted to throw this out there to say, hey, if you have not asked your question, please feel free to. But the first question came through that says, how could we continue to go from the divided states of America to the United States of America? I feel like there needs to be a little bit more context there, but I think I understand that question to say there's a lot of division within this country, and how do we start to incorporate efforts that really drive more unity and more cohesion as opposed to division?
I mean, I don't know if we'll finish that by 1 o'clock, but that is, listen, I think it starts with empathy and listening. I think a lot of times, and I saw a lot of people doing it very well, interpreting things. I think the perfect example is Black Lives Matter, right? And how people really had to define that saying that Black Lives Matter does not mean that others' lives don't. But right now, we're talking about Black Lives Matter. The same way that October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month doesn't mean that other cancers don't matter, but we're focusing on this particular issue. And so I think it's about listening. And a lot of times, because we've all been raised how we've been raised, or we've seen the world how we've seen it, it can be hard to understand that other people's point of view. And that's why I think it starts with just saying, I understand my shared experiences, and I also understand that there might be other shared experiences. And right now I'm going to listen. And I feel like if everyone would just kind of like not be so defensive, they would realize that a lot of us are saying the same thing. A lot of us want the same thing. It doesn't have to be divided, but it starts with like individuals, because I think a lot of times we're so macro that like we don't really start with the conversations you're having with your friends or the conversations you're having with your family. And everyone's like, well, why does the president do something? But it's like, this country is built with millions of individuals. So I think it starts there, and hopefully, we can find our way to just a little bit more empathy.
Yeah, I would just add on quickly that I just think there's been some conversation about storytelling, and I think that really just promoting humanism in storytelling is really key. Sometimes it amazes me when I hear people talk about different demographics and things of that sort, like people are from different planets, in essence, where it's just like literally everybody is human, right? And they have very similar experiences in some way, shape, or form, right? We know the Black experience is going to be different and whatnot, but really just kind of promoting that humanism in storytelling, where people realize, you're different, but you're the same. And I mean, I think the more that we can do that, hopefully, and put that on the big screen or social or however that works, how we can get that message out would hopefully help moving forward.
Yeah, I would. I love all of that, and I would add on allyship. Just really leveraging ally principles with just getting more connected to other communities, getting outside of your privilege, out of your bubble, if you will, in a sense, and becoming, comfortable with being uncomfortable in regards to your journey, right? Just sort of push yourself beyond your boundaries of your education, your know-how, to better understand and empathize with other communities, other colleagues on your team, et cetera, and so forth. And Brian Stevenson, who I admire so much, talks about becoming more proximate towards, communities. And so, again, we're seeing a hodgepodge of more diversity within communities, neighborhoods, things of that nature, like just continuing to fellowship with each other. There's sadly, unfortunately, a lot of things that we need to fix because of a very tough time, over the past couple of years, and it's going to take time. Again, the marathon, it's just sort of chipping away at it, but we have to be very sustained in our efforts, because there are so many outlets for information, news, resources, et cetera, and it's not all necessarily equal. And so ensuring that we just continue to work towards understanding and just sort of asking questions like, hey, you said such and such, what did you mean by that? Versus just assuming somebody was being disrespectful, whatever the case may be. So this allyship and becoming more proximate would be helpful as well.
And I'd also chime in to say, you say allyship. I like that term, but I actually like accomplices better. Like I feel like I'm always getting into trouble and like disrupting, systems or whatever. And so I like it when other people are coming along with me to do the dirty work. As our late Congressmember John Lewis said, we all need to try to figure out time to get in some good trouble, and that just rationalizes my rebelliousness a little bit. But I would also say that just one tangible outcome is take a moment to Google asset framing. Right there, I belong to a fellowship, and there is an amazing leader. His name is Trabian Shorters, and he came up with this whole notion. And this is really big in the racial equity / D&I space, but it talks about defining people based upon their aspirations and their contributions, as opposed to the worst things that have ever happened to them. Poverty is something that happened to a community. It's not something that is blamed amongst them. When we start to look historically at redlining and gerrymandering and all those things that have happened in our country that have consistently led to where various groups of people in this country still are struggling to simply survive. Right. And so our focus is on really focusing on those people from a positive lens as opposed to the most negative lens. I'm going to go ahead and throw in one more question. One of the questions from the audience is, what advice would you have for other marketers that don't know where to start on their DE&I journey and really being culturally sensitive to the types of communication and messaging that we're putting out into the market?
I think you've got to do some due diligence. I think you have to approach it at like any other thing that you don't know anything about. You have to like research it. And so I feel like sometimes it can seem like poof, like now I know everything about it, but that's impossible. You really have to set aside time. And the beautiful thing is you don't have to start from scratch. There are so many platforms who are doing this work. Brian Stevenson is, I'm obsessed with the Innocence Project and everything that's going on. And so I would really encourage folks, you know, there's, especially coming out of this summer, there's so many reading lists available. There's so many, you know, the 13th with Ava DuVernay, there's so many places that you can start. And I think sometimes it can get overwhelming where it's like, where do I start? But just start. You start in one place and then they'll recommend another place. And before you know it, you're educating yourself. But what I wouldn't do is like place the onus on this on like someone of color, because that can also just become a little bit burdensome. But I think we're living in such an age with so many resources that there's no wrong place to start in terms of becoming more familiar with other things.
I was going to add, I mean, I think it's an interesting question also because it mixes how does a marketer get more engaged with D&I, and one of the first things that when we delved into a lot more D&I focus is I found a lot of articles, and one Forbes article that I really like, which says, you know, it's diversity, inclusion, and multicultural marketing are not the same, right? So end of the day, they have to work together in essence, and we want to make sure though that one doesn't replace the other in certain instances, because what happens a lot of times is now is that okay, well we'll get our D&I together, you know, in essence, so we're going to get our house together, but because our house is together, we no longer need to invite people into the house, right? We stay within it, so it's like they have to work together in the same instance. So I think that to make sure that when it comes to resource allocation and things of that sort, you know, all that shift doesn't particularly change, because now we're saying, hey, well, inherently, because our company looks more like this, we've got to be evidently doing the work and reaching the people the same way. It still has to be intentional, right? From a multicultural marketing standpoint and a D&I standpoint. So, you know, I find that interesting to kind of make sure that those definitions are always really clear, and things that I've had to try to find, you know, in regards to those definitions. So it always feels like as a multicultural marketer, we are always looking at the definitions and the clarity of them from back when it was general market to total market to inclusive marketing to multicultural marketing to D&I to multicultural market. You know what I mean? It's like you're always educating and making sure you're having that clarity from folks. So as Imani said, I mean, I would really just dig into the research per se, and make sure you have some support in total and kind of what you're speaking about in regards to it. But just to watch out there as a multicultural marketer, don't feel as though D&I efforts are going to replace your multicultural marketing efforts, because end of the day, after you get it figured out and you have the right people in place in the structure and the recruitment and retention and all that we're speaking about, now you still have to go and get everybody else, right? You have to talk to the consumers in the way they need to be talked to. So just kind of a call out on my end.
All right, and this is going to be the closing question. This is going to be a fun one. So I had to search through all of them that won't require too much of an elaboration, but this one's cool. What was a campaign that you recently saw that made you smile? And I'm going to start this one off so before somebody else jumps on it, right? And I will say that it almost brought a tear to my eye, but it made my heart smile. And it was the Beats by Dre. I think it was, I forget the name of it, but it was like, I can't remember what the name of it was, but it was like, you don't.
Do you love our culture, right? So
yeah. I just don't remember the name of it, but yeah, it was amazing.
You love our culture, but do you love us? Something along that.
Yeah. So that was the one that made my heart smile, but it did draw a little bit of a tear to my eye.
I loved that Alexa commercial with Michael B. Jordan, where he was like, the Alexa, have you guys seen it? Alexa is like in his body. And so the woman, every time she asks Alexa to do something, it's Michael B. Jordan drawing her a bath or Michael B. Jordan playing her music. It's really, really funny.
Of course you did. I haven't
I
seen
mean,
it. I gotta Google
I'm very on brand with that one.
it.
I would have to give a quick shout out to Google for their sort of year in review, commercial that highlighted sort of the movement. We've been talking about it, so I have to give them some props on that. I thought it was very fantastic and just sort of really show, going back to the previous question. I mean, you could just sort of watch that to understand sort of like, whoa, this should wake you up in regards to like there needs to be some change. So I thought that was incredibly done well, particularly with the fact that it was mostly from users and obviously people actually going through those experiences and sharing their protest moments and things of that nature.
Was it the one where they said the most searched Google, like the most searched this, the most searched that, or was it a different one?
I might be mixing it up. So,
That one
it
was
was one of
really
those.
cool too. Yeah, Google's been doing some really good work.
I know it's what you're talking about. So I think that includes Serena, but this one was more so focusing on like the Black Lives Matter movement.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would just say in a simple sense, I'm a big fan of music and commercials per se. So I would say the Target ads over the holidays with Real Love from Mary J. Blige, as much as they stuck in your head so much, I just love to hear Mary in a commercial, right? I don't know. I just love to hear when our soundtrack is actually put to some of these commercials per se. So, it wasn't, too out of the box, but I just, that's one that made me smile, I'd say.
Well, hey, this has been an amazing conversation. And I'm just going to take one comment out of the comment section. And it's actually a personal friend of mine. I'm not going to call him out, but he is an ally and has always shown himself as an ally. And he has some last parting words for us as well. He says, be, do, say. Don't talk until you're doing. Don't do until you are. So I just think that we just could not end harder than that. So, for him, I am so appreciative of your friendship. Thank you so much for coming out to support today. Thank you to each one of the panelists. You guys were amazing and definitely keep us posted. We definitely, from a DE&I perspective with AMA, want to be able to shout to the top of our lungs some of the programming that you guys have coming out, some of the things that you're doing. This is just a start of a whole bunch of conversations. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you, AMA. Thank you, the whole DE&I Council. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Roy to close us out. You guys have a great afternoon.
Awesome. Thank you, Twana. And thank you to all of our panelists. Just a few things that were shared. Allyship is very important, but accomplices work too. Progress is a marathon, so be sure to protect your peace. Think about your role, find leaders and work together and hold them accountable. DEI and multicultural marketing are not the same thing. The two must work together. So I really want to thank you all again. We have to, of course, acknowledge our sponsors who have always helped our brand in being able to do things. I also would like to thank the committee. And also just for you all to know, we do have some committee member vacancy. So if you are interested in joining the movement, please feel free to email me. Thank you to our AMA leadership team. And also be sure to check out a blog on why Black History Month matters that we'll be publishing very soon to close us out. So we thank you all for joining us. Have a happy Friday and thanks again.